Geology and Ancient Civilizations with Bob Johnson. You're listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. We have another special show for you guys this week. We are joined by a special guest in studio, which is that's our favorite way to do it.
Yep.
That way we are face to face and really get down to business.
That's right.
And the Watcher should be in here somewhere. I think he's listening.
He'll show up eventually.
He'll be here eventually. Yeah. So our guest this week is a geologist. You worked mostly in the oil and gas industry. And what was the area you said you mostly worked in?
North Africa, the Middle East.
North Africa and the Middle East. Yeah. And he has 35 years traveling around, and he has a lot of very interesting stories that we're going to get into. So can't wait for that. And thank you for joining us, man. It's glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
All right.
And it's a very special occasion.
That's right.
Because your name is Bob Johnson.
Yes, I am Bob, one of those pesky Johnsons.
There you go. Johnson in studio.
We
ladies and gentlemen.
finally got Johnson in the studio, folks.
He's alive.
Heck yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and do Space Weather News.
That
What?
failed.
That failed? Oh, yeah, you weren't recording. There we go.
God dang it. Zero edits, zero mistakes, handling all technical difficulties flawlessly.
Space Weather News. Ladies and gentlemen, from spaceweather.com, a comet flirts with danger. Comet Neowise, or C/2020 F3, is plunging towards the sun and could soon become a naked eye object. The question is, can it survive the sun's blistering heat? We might find out as early as next week when the comet enters the field of view of SOHO coronagraphs. Also, an outbreak of the noctilucent clouds over Europe. Night is supposed to be dark, but not last night across northern and central Europe on June 16th and 17th. The sky lit up with electric blue ripples from noctilucent or night-shining clouds. It was a very bright display, reports Arnim Berhorst, who sends this picture from Bergen, Norway. NLCs are Earth's highest clouds. Seeded by meteoroids, they float at the edge of space 83 kilometers above the surface. The clouds form when summertime wisps of water vapor rise up to the mesosphere, allowing water to crystallize around specks of meteor smoke. Last summer, NLCs spread as far south as Los Angeles and Las Vegas, setting records for low-latitude sightings. And 2020 is shaping up to be just as good. Record cold temperatures in the mesosphere are boosting the production of the NLCs, pushing them farther south with each passing night. So stay tuned. Let's see. Current conditions. Solar wind speed, 279.6 kilometers per second, and the density is a medium 7.7 protons per cubic centimeter.
No sunspots?
That's a good question. Sunspot number 0.
All right. Deep solar minimum, folks. Still there.
That's right.
So this is from earthsky.org. Biggest asteroid to pass close and undetected this year. Asteroid 2020 LD passed within the moon's distance on June 5th, but wasn't discovered until June 7th. It's the 45th known and largest asteroid to sweep within a lunar distance of Earth so far in 2020. We hear a lot about asteroids or comets passing close to Earth, but what does close mean? For a comet, it might mean millions of miles. For an asteroid, it might mean enormous distances as well, beyond the moon's orbital distance of about 250,000 miles. On the other hand, space rocks coming closer than our moon catch people's attention, especially if the asteroids are good-sized. That was the case with asteroid 2020 LD, which swept closest to Earth on June 5th, flying by at only about 80% of the moon's distance, which is 190,559 miles.
So it was between the moon and us.
Yes. At around 400 feet in diameter, 2020 LD is the largest asteroid to have come within one lunar distance this year or last year, in fact, since 2011. And it also ranks as one of the biggest asteroids ever to fly this close to Earth without being previously detected. That's right. 2020 LD passed undetected on June 5th. No one noticed it until 2 days later on June 7th.
Okay.
400 feet in diameter.
400 feet in diameter. It went between us and the moon, and no one saw it until it had already passed.
Yeah.
That's like, if it was a little closer, that's game over.
Yeah, and also
That's game over.
That's scary.
it was traveling at 60,826 miles per hour.
Wow. Yep, that's really fast.
So do you remember what the Tunguska?
Well, I mean, the estimate of its size was 150 feet.
150 feet, yeah.
And it was, they think, 40, maybe between 30 and 40,000 miles per hour. So this one's 400 feet and going 60.
Yeah.
It
That
would have
been
made
rough.
Yeah, it would have been rough. It would have made it to the ground, right? Probably.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, how long are you in the atmosphere if you're going 60,000 miles per hour? 2 seconds before you hit the ground?
Not long.
That's
not long.
right.
Not long.
Not very long.
All right, the Watcher is here. He's having trouble in his space station with his microphone, per usual.
As
So,
usual, yeah.
Thanks for being there for us, buddy.
Yep. 160 to 620 feet, depending on whether the body entered with low or high speed for the Tunguska object. Huh. Yeah, I guess it would be hard to tell. It could be very small and incredibly,
Dense.
and fast, or large and slow,
Yeah.
and porous.
Cool.
But still, that's a scary one. All right. So, you're up.
I have one request.
Okay.
Tell the Watcher not to correct me on the fly.
Okay. Right, Watcher. Assume that everything Johnson says is totally correct.
The Johnson seal of approval. That's right. Okay. I guess you want me to talk.
Yeah, well,
about-
let's talk about how you started in geology and why you went into that field, and then what your interest was, and then how it turned into you traveling all of these places.
Yeah.
When I was in the Army before I went to college. This is back during the Vietnam War. I was on a Special Forces dive team. And I loved the diving part. And so when I got out, I thought I would go into marine geology. That was one of the things I wanted to do. I was kind of conflicted at the time, so I went into a small liberal arts school. I got a degree in geology and a bachelor's degree in psychology. So if I said I can do Rorschach tests then. Anyway,
we're a huge fan of puns on this show. So.
That's right.
I didn't know that. Okay. Figuring there's only way to make a living, it would be geology. I went in and got my master's in that in structural geology at Kentucky, University of Kentucky. I did not want to really work in the oil industry. I wanted to do environmental or work in copper, coal, something like that.
Like
nothing
mining.
Was, like mining.
Okay.
Nothing was available. So I took a job with Amoco and spent 6 years in New Orleans. Moved for various reasons, moved to Houston, then immediately moved overseas to Egypt. We spent 3.5 years in Egypt, just outside of Cairo. Came back. I left Amoco and went to Saudi Aramco in Saudi Arabia, Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, where I spent 15 years there.
Wow.
I left them, I retired from them, and came back here. Spent a couple of years on the ranch that I have here. It drove me nuts. And so I figured there got to be something more going on. So I started with Apache and went right straight back to Cairo for another 3 years. And then I came to Midland, went to Midland. So that's about 35 years in the industry. I spent 21 years in North Africa and the Middle East.
Wow. I'm super jealous.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, man, that's a lot of time to look at pyramids.
Yeah.
So did you go to a lot of ancient sites, or I know you were working, but
when we lived in Egypt the first time, Egypt is a really interesting place because it's so central to a lot of the areas that you guys have probably talked about.
yeah,
So we went to places like spent a lot of time in Turkey. Went all up and down the coast there of the Mediterranean, Ephesus, the ruins there, the Roman ruins there. We went into eastern Turkey, back with you can't even go now because of it's all been flooded. I remember the giant heads on the hill. Nimrod. There's a king called Nimrod who made a bunch of heads that are like 10, 12 feet high each one.
Yeah, I think
Set a bunch of them. We visited that, went to Malta, Tunisia, all these places. And
You went to Malta?
we went to Malta.
All
Malta
right.
has some great stuff. Malta's really interesting
Malta
stuff.
is very interesting, yeah.
That's a place my wife would love to go retire to after
Yeah.
retiring from here.
I bet.
The thing that I want to talk about living in Cairo is probably what we have talked about a little bit, is the Fayum Oasis. The Fayum Oasis is about 100 kilometers from Cairo, and it's a really, really interesting place. It's got a lot of history that is just fascinating, especially for geologists and anthropologists and people like that. A little bit of geology to kind of start us off. Back in the late Cretaceous to about the early middle Eocene, so we're talking probably 110 million to 55 million years ago. That area had a lot. It was covered with a shallow sea, shallow marine sea. Water started going down, started receding as you just had sea level fall, and that wound up stranding a lot of what had been big depressions and stuff where had been filled with water, wound up being stranded, and eventually were dry. So the first thing that we want to talk about is Wadi al-Hitan, which is a little bit west of the Fayum, and that's the one that's called the Valley of the Whales.
The Valley of the Whales, I was about to ask you. How did those whales
phenomenal.
get stranded there? Yeah.
They're stranded there. So you have a bunch of different species of whales that have been stranded there. And the thing that's interesting is these whales are laying on the surface.
Yeah, the Watchers just
That's
posted
the
the pictures
Nimrod.
of the
That's
heads.
it's fascinating stuff. Anyway, they have the whales laying on the surface, and the skeletons are still articulated. They haven't been disarticulated.
Wow.
And
Right,
stuff.
yeah.
And one of the things that's really interesting is this is where they will go to study the whale's evolution because it's so easy to get to these things. They even have two species of whales that still have hind legs, feet, and toes.
Whoa.
So they start to see where the whales went from being a land animal to a air-breathing mammal.
Now, are these bones stone at this point?
Most are, yes. Most have been petrified. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So it's a really, really interesting place that you can't get in and just really get feet in, but you can go around and you can see it. So,
And there's
that's worth doing.
Yeah, and there's other, like I've seen pictures, and of course there's the whale skeletons that are, like you said, all articulated, like they were beached basically.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
it's like they were stranded in this pool.
And they just died.
Yeah, that's interesting because you would imagine if there was a slow recession of the water that they would get stranded in the water because it was too shallow, but then they would putrefy and stuff in the water but I don't know.
Well, they would. I mean, the soft tissue's gone. It's just the hard tissue left. But again, when I say
they weren't
slow,
disarticulated. It's just
yeah.
When I say slow, I'm talking slow in geologic terms, not.
Yeah.
So we're talking millions of years as this water dropped
Yeah,
and
right.
wound up just filling the Mediterranean basin. Anyway, to the east of that is the Fayum Oasis. The Fayum Oasis is a area that was filled with different kinds of water, like it had springs that fed it, rains that feed it, and stuff, because it was a big depression. About 70,000 years ago, the Nile silted up, and a branch of the Nile came out and filled the depression for good. It's a huge area. It's a huge lake once it's filled. The lake remained filled, and for the most part, the Nile came back to its more modern course now. The water did start to evaporate, but again, because it was spring-fed, you didn't immediately
long
dry
time,
up.
yeah.
It took a long time. So you fast forward to around 7,500, 8,000 years ago, there's really good evidence for man in the Sahara near there. The first real evidence we have of man in the Fayum is around 7,500 years ago, plus or minus. And man came in. It was a very lush area, a lot of plants and stuff. There was fish there, birds, and so they wound up hunting for that. They would burn a lot of the brush and the biomass along the edge of the lake, burn it, and drive animals out and stuff. Getting closer now, take a step back. I've been in that area, and I've done a lot of arrowhead hunting in that area. And it's a really incredible area to find arrowheads. And the arrowheads that you find there are really unique arrowheads. When you think about, when you're going to look for the arrowheads, you think about this big basin. And there are rings around the basin, and each ring represents a shoreline. A shoreline. So you have these succeeding rings getting smaller and smaller as they go towards the center of the basin. The newer stuff, of course, is towards the bottom. The older stuff is towards the top. And you have at least two different populations that came in that area. One's called the Fayum A, and the other's the Fayum B. I've showed you examples of each of these kinds of arrowheads, and those are the ones that had the look almost like a U. Remember those?
Yes.
Those are
the Star Trek symbols.
like it's exactly like a Star Trek symbol.
I started to think they were like harpoons. You know, they almost look like a harpoon, like you stab it
with
in.
With those wings, with those tanks.
Yes, exactly.
Tanks, they very well probably were.
Yeah.
About 2,000 years ago, plus or minus, one of the pharaohs in the Middle Kingdom had a huge agricultural canal dug from the Nile River to the Fayum. So after that, and as long as it was kept open, every year when the Nile flooded, water would rush into this basin and keep it filled up.
Wow.
He had Johnson geologists working for him.
Yeah, a lot of big Johnsons there. Yeah. Anyway, pulling all that stuff.
Trust me, just dig a ditch all the way to this basin.
Like 100 kilometers. It's a short distance. 65 miles. Anyway, when these things would flood, of course, they would carry crocodiles in from the Nile. These are freshwater crocodiles. So they get flushed in with this water. So when you go to this basin on the very edge, when the Pharaoh first started filling it up, you have this really interesting structure, but 2,000-year-old structure that's built for the crocodile gods. As you move further in, you get more towards the Greek and Roman times, the canals were not maintained as well. So the water started dropping down, and you can see where the Greeks were, you can see where the Romans were. In fact, there's a Roman city there called Dyme, which is fabulous ruins out in the middle of the desert. 8-foot thick walls that are 40 feet high and stuff like that. And you can see where the Romans were going out in the lake and fishing, because you have all sorts of lead balls that would go around the nets and stuff to weight the nets down. Mm-hmm. You have the copper or bronze arrowheads that can be found out there and things like that. The area has always been lush, and the Romans called it the breadbasket of the empire because they could grow so much grain there and then ship it out. So it's a really important area to the Romans.
Yeah, I imagine when the Nile floods it, it brings in all the silt, and it's very, very fertile.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So the Fayum is a really interesting area. You can't really do a lot there now because of the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's kind of dangerous there now. Mm-hmm. But at some point, it'll get freed up again. And when it does, it's something that if anybody ever has a chance to go there, go to Cairo and then go out to the Fayum, it's worth doing.
Now, is this a place where you were saying the dunes would move around and you would go out and pick up?
That's in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, okay.
We'll move there next. Right. That's the Fayum has a lot of Roman ruins there. That's also not too far from where they had a couple of the oracles. For the Greeks, the most important oracle was in Greece. The second most important oracle for the Greeks and Romans was in the oracle out in the Fayum Oasis, which is to the west of here. So a lot of Roman generals and leaders and stuff made treks out to this oracle.
Is this the Oracle of Delphi, or is that? Which one is it?
I think the Oracle of Delphi is the one that's in Greece.
It's in
this is the
Greece.
one, the Siwa Oasis.
Okay.
That I'm talking about. But this whole area has a lot of history. There were just to the north and west of there is where the World War II battles, Alamein was fought. They have found just in the last couple of years, they found a German pilot who had been shot down, and he'd been there since World War II.
Wow.
Found his body, and they repatriated his body. We've been out there and we found missiles laying on the ground that have been shot, probably from between one of the Arab-Israeli wars. It's just an area that has had a lot of things for thousands of years going on. That's really important.
Yeah, and a lot of it's like desert wilderness, so there's not
even a wilderness, just flat out desert. There's
Right.
nothing growing there. Nothing
at all.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Hard pan, polished rock and sand.
Wow. Yeah, and so stuff can easily get lost. That's why you would find like a pilot out there from 70
Yes.
years ago, or
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Now,
It's crazy.
if you go further to the west, if you go to the corners of where Libya and Sudan and Egypt are, quite a bit further west, there is a series. There's a series of caves back there that are really interesting in that those caves have pictures that have been carved in and drawn and then colored of people diving into pools of all sorts of everything from gazelle to ostrich to longhorn cattle, water buffalo. They even think maybe some hippos. And they date back to about 9,000 years. So what this is telling you is how that climate has changed
shifted. Yeah.
over time. So 9,000 years ago, there were people living there diving into existing pools of water, and now it's all desert.
Yep.
Yeah. That was. I mean, I know that they think some of that area was like savanna land for a lot of
Yes.
grasslands.
Yes.
Yeah, there's like rocks in the middle of the desert that show horses and
Yes.
yeah.
So the petroglyphs, basically, I'm gonna call them petroglyphs,
Sure.
just cave drawings. How are they dated? Are they just dating them like what is it called? Through the artifacts and other things found around, or are the petroglyphs themselves actually been
If they're
dated?
painted, you could probably date the organics in the
Yeah.
paint.
I honestly don't know. I all I know is what I've been told. I never really asked that question.
Because 7,000 BC.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I wish they would have kept the symbols pretty simple like that. Oh yeah, this guy's diving into a pool.
Yeah. It's clear what's
That's pretty
happening
clear.
here.
But then later you're like, what the hell is this guy doing? And why does he have a bowling pin in his hat?
That's right.
Yeah.
Man, that's cool stuff.
What time we got? I know the Santa
Yeah, I
time.
started a little late.
All right.
Yeah.
We still got time.
But
So-
yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, when we, living in Cairo, kind of moving now away from there, we go to the Upper Nile, which of course is to the south, and go to all the ruins that are down in that area, Abu Simbel and all these things. We go past the dam, there's one dam, and into the lakes and stuff back there. Living there 2 times allowed us to make a lot of these trips.
Yeah.
And I was telling Kyle that when our first time there, we have 3 boys, and they were on the order of like 2, 3, and 5, I think. And we used to go out to an agricultural village. It was Abu Sur, where there's a series of ruins that weren't guarded or anything. So we would just go out and have picnics on these things. And so the kids climbed inside of ruined pyramids. Pyramids that had started to collapse a little bit were still standing. We had all sorts of columns laying on the ground, structures where you go through a hole in the wall and you slide down into a lower level where there was still a sarcophagus standing there, and they climbed in and out of the sarcophagus and stuff. And this is what these boys grew up on. That was their, that kind of stuff they did in the Middle East.
That's
growing
freaking awesome. Did you guys ever like run through the? I've heard there's all these tunnels and stuff all under like the Giza Plateau, all around.
Oh man,
yeah.
Giza Plateau. I love the Giza Plateau. We have been through I can't say all the ruins there, but we started out with Memphis, where the statues are, the big statue of Ramses II, laying on the ground.
Yeah.
And then you go into...
that thing is enormous.
It is. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's absolutely huge. And they're still discovering stuff out in that area. And it's kind of a step down from the actual plateau. So you go up on the plateau, and you have ruins there that are everything from Pharaonic, Phoenician, believe it or not, Phoenician, Greek, and Roman. So it's an incredible mix of cultures on the plateau. We have there's an amphitheater there which has a bunch of Greek statue heads. Then I'm trying to remember the name of the labyrinth that we'd go to, where they bury the bulls in the bull sarcophagus.
Serapeum.
Serapeum.
The Serapeum. Oh my God, we've been to the Serapeum probably 10 times. I love it. And
How big are the boxes?
you go down in that. I'm sure you guys have talked about it.
Oh, yes.
You go down, you hang a left or a right, and then you have to go turn again. It's like a football field underground, just the outlines of it. And the sarcophagus are just gigantic.
Yeah.
And they're smooth. The work that's been done and the works on the lids to make them fit.
Yeah.
And they come from upriver.
Right.
It's just phenomenal, the work that they did.
So this is part of the precision show. So there was a series of shows that we did where our buddy Archer did a presentation on the Serapeum and the engineering level, like the skill level of the creation of these boxes. Mm-hmm. Then he came back and did this precision episode because it's to look at the precision of the construction of these boxes is like how you have to have certain levels of technology and ability and sophistication and knowledge, and they're even, I guess the ideas they may have actually been cored out in the Serapeum.
I was just going to say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's just
because
like
there is one in there. There is one box. You can see it right there. There's one sarcophagus, which. And maybe that's 26.
Yeah, 26 in the middle of the hallway.
Is in the middle of the hallway, and they clearly stopped, and they never continued after that. And it's a solid block.
Right.
So they wound up
including the
lid.
The lid would have been cut off of it.
The lid has not been cut off yet. So it's just, and it's how many hundreds of tons.
Right.
It's just amazing.
And it's never been moved since they put it down right there. Because and that's the other thing. You see these. We talk about this a lot. That. In National Geographic or whatever, you see these. They have the pictures. There's the big block, and there's all these ropes, and there's all these guys. But then you look at this, and you're like, okay, you can't fit 1,000 dudes in there to drag that block around. There's just no room. So how are they moving this?
I don't know what they do about block and tackle or what. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's
there. But there are other ruins there too. This is one of my particular favorites. But there's other ruins there that are really interesting. You can tell where they dug blocks out of the ground because there's this one huge hole that's probably 60 feet, maybe 70 feet long by about 40 feet across. And it's where they've cut blocks out.
Yeah.
And it's probably 100 feet deep. And you go, how the heck?
How are they lifting them?
But if you look on the sides, you see holes where
they're mounting stuff.
They had some kind of wood. I mean, these are like tree trunks or something they put in.
Something perishable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they lift up and put them on the floor or something. But it's just phenomenal stuff. There are huts that are built along the side of that are apparently Roman, for Roman soldiers. So you've got the Greek arena, you've got these Roman things, there's Phoenician structures in there, and the Phoenicians were about the time of, I guess, of the Greeks, but they were a seafaring people. So what are they doing there?
Yeah, what?
and then you've got all these tombs. There's this one tomb that we went to, which was a princess's tomb, which literally is cut about 200 feet down.
And this is near the plateau?
It's right in this area.
Oh, okay, all right.
It's right in the area of the Saqqara Plateau.
Saqqara, yeah, Saqqara.
So it's within quarter of a mile at the most. And it's the shaft is maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. It's about the size of this thing here. And it goes down 200 feet.
Wow.
God.
And then it goes, and it does a turn, and it goes off, and then that's where the body is, or that's where the sarcophagus was.
Yeah.
It's all painted and everything. And there's this spiral staircase that just goes down forever to get to it.
Modern spiral staircase.
Modern spiral staircase. Yeah. And you wonder the effort. Why would they do that? I mean, I understand that this is royalty, but it's just the effort that goes into things like that are just phenomenal.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's completely boggles the mind. I don't know.
This is one of the questions we ask in this podcast quite often.
You're asking a Johnson here, and I don't know.
We're all Johnsons here. We don't know. That's awesome. The Serapeum. We have never been there, but that is definitely on the list.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We've got to see
recommend
this.
It.
So we're going with the Snake Force.
Yeah, taking the Snake Force. And the other thing I was going to say about it is
better Snake Plissken.
Like so you noticed just looking at the boxes in there how the how polished they are, how smooth, and it turns out some engineers have gone in there, and it turns out that you need modern precision tools to measure the precision of these boxes.
And how they do it,
and that implies that the level of precision that they were made in, like if you need modern tools to measure the precision, that how much
because they're that finely made,
right? Then how did they do this? It's one thing to there's this thing about precision where you can take something flat and then something else that's flat, or you're trying to make them flat, and you can there's a process you can do to rub them together until you get there. You have to have 3 of them, right? And there's a process you can do where you end up with something that's really flat. This is how they make the granite plates that are used to measure flatness. Mm-hmm. But you can't do that on an inside surface like they have in the boxes. And the flattest parts of those boxes are the interiors.
Yes.
So the inside corners, and there's a place where it's a 3-way corner. How do they do that? And then the engineers have measured, and it's this time the radius of the corner is ridiculous.
And they're getting consistent.
Yeah.
All the corners.
Right. It's 90 degrees and they match each other and everything. And
we've never found the tools to do this stuff. But when we were in Upper Egypt, have you ever heard of what's called the unfinished obelisk?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we went to that. And are you familiar with how they did that?
Well, I mean, the standard model, they have the little stone balls there.
Dolomites. These are
dolomite balls, yeah.
Which is harder than the stone they're making out of. But what they would do is they would dig a trench down on each side. So you've got the upper surface is one side. It's a 4-sided piece of stone. They dig down and they would do the 2 sides into the ground, into the stone. And then they would they would take these dolomite stones and they would drill at the very bottom. They would drill underneath and meet on each side. So now you've got you've got 3 surfaces that have been cut, and then now you're working on the 4th one. That's the one that's resting on.
Yeah.
You have a bunch of holes that have been drilled through, almost like ventilation holes. And apparently, what they would do is put wood in there and light it. They'd burn the wood. The temperature would crack the stone in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In between those holes, and once you got that cracked, you can either dig it out or you lift it out and just smooth it then. But that's
How do you think they plan to lift that thing out of there?
I don't know. But I guess the point I was going to make is we've never found the tools that make sarcophagus at the Serapeum.
Right.
And what we have seen on the unfinished obelisk is a very
somewhat
smart,
crude.
yet still, it's still a primitive way of doing it.
You could not make that fine corner with that round
with that
stone
technology.
ball.
No.
Yeah, with that technology, yeah, absolutely. And of course, you couldn't make these perfectly parallel surfaces either, because if it was just hand, there's going to be imperfections.
Which you could see, at least microscopic.
Right, you'd be able to measure it.
At least them,
yeah.
if not bigger.
Yeah, you'd be able to measure it, especially with modern tools, and it just doesn't, So it's and we've looked at the unfinished obelisk, and I'm still not sure I buy the Dolomite Ball story. I'm just like, maybe, but I don't know about that.
If you have 10,000 guys, each got his own little Dolomite ball.
Yeah.
Some of those trenches are pretty freaking narrow too. You're just like, okay.
Yes, and that was one of the things you know. They're really on the order of a foot, maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah, and then you get all the way down underneath that thing, and then they're starting. So you imagine them trapped in the corner, and you don't have any room to swing the ball.
Or grinding or whatever.
Yeah, it's granite.
How do you get air down there if you're trying to burn something? How do you keep the
Right,
oxygen
how do you
going?
keep it- yeah.
So I don't know, but that's
Yeah.
You got to scale up your Johnsons. You got to scale them up.
all right. I'm done with that already.
All right, we're taking a break.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, joined with actually two guests. Bob Johnson and his son Sean is also here. Actually didn't give him a microphone, so he was banned.
He's
like,
banned.
We talked for 5 minutes when he first got here. I was like, "You're not getting a mic."
I'm not a worthy Johnson.
No, I'm just kidding. So we are going to.
But yeah, it's cool. Like I was just gonna say, like Bob was just saying that so Sean grew up in these ruins, was like playing in these places. So that's like really, we're totally jealous, man. That's really, what does that, I mean, do you think about that often that you like?
Hey, man.
when you're a kid, that was just normal.
Yeah. See?
Yeah, that's true.
Like, you just like that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, like we just like maybe a 15-minute taxi ride to the pyramids from where I went to school.
Yeah.
That was just not that.
That's amazing.
Special. Actually, I'd even go to the pyramids, and it kind of almost got boring in a way.
So you
I hate
guys
to say it like that, but it's like it's not like for me. There's no real desire to go there. It's just like been there, done that. Like, so many times that it's I'll take a friend or something, but yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to get you guys to like go with us, because y'all probably know everything, you know how to get around and all that. So yeah, you're going.
Yeah.
So I want to open. We wanted to open some of the Brewmaster beers.
Oh, yeah.
We brought some in here. They're on ice, gentlemen. So let's see.
I'll take a small in here.
All right, so we've got an American IPA, we got an American brown ale, and American porter.
I'll take whatever's left over.
I don't.
IPA if you can.
You want the IPA? Okay. American
Yeah,
IPA.
I've got the amber ale.
I've tried the brown ale already. It's good. I'm gonna take the porter. So.
I'm impressed. I've made a lot of beer. As we were talking, I've made a lot of beer. And the gentleman who did this, I'm impressed. I really am.
All right. Yeah.
The presentation here is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. These are beautiful cans. So cheers, guys.
Yeah.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers, gentlemen.
Gentlemen, cheers.
Very good.
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
Very nice.
That is good.
So you guys used to make beer. You said everybody had a still.
Yeah, that's shifting over to Saudi Arabia in Dhahran. We lived in Dhahran for 15 years, and Dhahran itself is a camp. It's probably 5 miles by 5 miles, so it's a 25 square mile camp with 2 small cities on it. It had a bowling alley, movie theater, a bunch of softball fields, tracks, and stuff like that. So it was a self-contained area that was like the United States in the 1950s. Everybody that was there was all 2-parent families, so no single parents were accepted to come over. And there were 2 different schools. It was a very conservative kind of thing. There were some crazy people there, but overall, it was like a throwback to 30, 40, 50 years ago. It was a good place to raise a family.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we wanted to talk about a couple things here. One thing was talking about this little village that I did some work on as a geologist. The other was to talk about the Rubicali. So if you don't mind, let's move kind of from west to east. We'll start in the village and the Red Sea. Red Sea is kind of a weird thing. It looks like it's incipient ocean forming there. It's got oceanic crust at the bottom.
Incipient? What does that mean? Incipient.
The Red Sea, the Arabian plate split from the African plate about probably 55 million years ago. And that's where you have going up towards the northern part you go up into the Gulf of Suez, and then you have the Suez Canal. And if you go to the east, it's, I forget the name of the Gulf, but that goes up to Israel, Lebanon, and that area, Jordan. The Arabian plate is actually, it's like it's pinned and it's rotating counterclockwise. So the southern part is further apart. The southern part of the Red Sea is wider than the northern part. And in the very central part of the basin, the actual rift part of the basin, it's pretty clear the oceanic crust is being formed. The shelf, the rest of the basin and the shelf on the edge, don't know, it's probably continental mostly. But because you have this oceanic crust coming up, it's very hot. They have a lot of salt there, and from a point of view that I did, it wasn't a good, even though I spent a couple of years investigating it, it wasn't really, turned out in the end, it wasn't a good area for oil and gas. But because I had done so much work on the Red Sea, I got called in on this investigative thing, which is really kind of interesting. We did this investigation. A Saudi geophysicist and I did our report, sent it to the government. They, for whatever reason, they classified it. It was confidential, and nobody knew about it for a while. This report was on a small village that was on the coast of the Red Sea. It's about halfway down. And it was a small compound that was mainly 3 or 4 families from the same family group. So they were brothers and aunts and uncles, that sort of thing. And there was, I think, 5 or 6 families in this compound. The compound was maybe 200 yards, 200 meters on a side. They started having these mysterious fires in this compound, and it was freaking them out. They had a couple different times, guys were sleeping on their beds. The beds are just, think of a small frame like for a single person, and instead of a mattress or anything, they would just weave back and forth with rope. So it was just a woven kind of a thing, and that's what they would put their blanket on or whatever. A guy would be sleeping in that, and all of a sudden his bed would catch on fire. There were multiple times when a corner of a room caught on fire. You have an example of a kitchen cabinet caught on fire on the inside. So you see where it burned on the inside, but there's no burn marks on the outside. Just weird stuff.
I remember you showing me a picture of that in the report.
It was just weird stuff. And it was freaking these people out. And they said this was the evil Djinn. And that was why the government wanted us to investigate. And that's why in the end they wound up making it confidential for a while. They didn't want that kind of, it was not modern thinking, so they didn't want it out. Anyway, we went there to this village. We went to the village, and we did a legitimate investigation. First thing we did was, it was surrounded by National Guard, and they were kind of freaked because when they knew an investigation would start, the National Guard had showed up and put a ring with tents and stuff. They put their people all around the outsides of the compound. And immediately their tents started catching on fire. So National Guard tents on the outside were catching on fire.
Let's just say like the Djinn, the idea of the Djinn, they're in the myth they're made of smokeless fire.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's this the idea is interesting. So okay, keep going. I just wanted to say that for the listeners.
Where was I?
The National Guard tents.
The tents had caught on fire, so they were kind of freaking out. We showed up, and we did a legitimate investigation. There was took a lot of pictures. A lot of stuff had been moved outside of the building. So where they would normally have stuff inside the building, it all been moved out on these big concrete pads they had. In this one place, they had a small TV. They'd thrown a blanket over the TV. And the TV caught on fire out in the pad. Just what? And it was, and they always said the smell was like rat droppings. Was how they described it. Rotten rat droppings was how they described all of them uniformly. So We interviewed all the people there we were looking for, and I knew it wasn't legitimate, but we had to rule it out. So we talked to people. There was no insurance there. There was no kind of thing where anybody would be doing it on purpose. No,
right.
No arson,
no kind of
stuff
fraud.
like that.
Yeah.
We knocked that out. We went in and we started taking samples of the dirt. We took samples of the water, and there were places where literally the ground had caught on fire, and where you could see where it burned the tree above, but the ground itself was just burning.
What?
It was a weird thing. A couple things we did find. One was that they had termites. There was termites in the area, and that was significant, I think. And as I mentioned earlier to one of you guys too, they had a middens, a garbage dump that they had buried that was half a mile away or less.
But it was old, right?
It was an old one.
Yeah.
It was old and they'd been buried. Now, the area that this village is in is an area with a lot of hydrocarbons on the coast. Not in economic amounts. In other words, it's not the kind of things that someone would go and drill and produce, but there is multiple examples of where a green flame had been burning and had burned across this plain. Been chased by police cars and stuff, and it was just weird stuff. Just this is all anecdotal, but I mean, it was we believe it was true. There's just lots of these things.
Yeah.
We went back and did some seismic, and there's a lot of faulting in the area. So anything that was buried deep could easily get to the surface as far as gas, methane gas. We went and looked at everything that we could.
Was there coal?
There was no coal. Well, there may have been coal, none that we found. There was more. It was more just natural gas being formed at depth and coming up. But the point that I would make is that there was gas coming from this midden that had been buried. I think you can produce methane that way.
Methane.
Termites produce methane, which I didn't know before.
In combustible amounts?
Yes, it
what
can
is-
be.
Wow.
It depends upon the infestation.
Okay,
And this is from their, like, what do you call it?
They're eating the
Their
organic, the
feces
wood and
and-
stuff, and everything. And it just, it's like cattle can do the same thing. So you got at least 3 different sources of methane in the area. The thing is, we could never come up with a way to ignite it. That's the thing. How do you make this stuff catch on fire? What's the spark? It was there was a weird wind pattern that year coming, so you had a lot of breeze coming in from the Red Sea rather than going out from the desert or the shelf going out to the ocean. It was coming in from the ocean. It was a very humid year, which is kind of weird out in that area. So you had this breeze, this humid breeze, and you would think if you have a breeze, if you got a methane buildups, you would kind of clear it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously not. So if anybody has some ideas on how you get this stuff on fire, I would love to know. I have presented this to multiple groups of geologists and engineers and other scientists, and nobody has come up with an explanation, a legitimate explanation of how to get this stuff on fire.
The Djinn.
The Djinn.
The Djinn.
Yeah.
Well, come
The
on.
Djinn.
I mean, you started with the answer.
Yes.
And I wonder, though, this is like looking at this slightly backwards, that this is an area where myths and legends of the smokeless fire beings come from.
Yes. Yep.
And here you are in a village where people are saying it's the Djinn. They know it from the legends, and they're calling what's happening the Djinn, but maybe the legends themselves originated because of this same phenomenon that you guys observed. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And scientists can't even come up with a better explanation.
Well, right. But I mean, okay, so they've been somewhat personified, the Djinn, given agency, but maybe originally they were just some strange geological and physical phenomenon that is unexplained yet. So, piezoelectricity? Spark, maybe?
What would you have to generate that?
Large crystals underground.
Large crystals that are occasionally put under various stresses that end up generating electricity.
There's already fault lines, right? So you've got all this fault stresses. If there are large crystal growths underground, you could possibly generate electrical currents that could discharge and ignite the gases, maybe.
This silence is me thinking.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. That's not something that had really occurred.
Is it
to
a
me.
real sandy area?
Yes.
Okay.
But I don't know how thick the sand is. Is
Yeah.
it 10 feet thick? Is it 110 feet thick? I don't know in that area.
Because I was just thinking of like, it's windy. So the problem with the windy is like that should clear out the gases.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when it's windy in a sandy area, there's going to be a ground layer of sand that's just moving all the time. And does that build up static? I don't know.
That's called saltation.
Okay.
That bouncing motion.
Yeah.
And that possibly could, but yet I don't know if you'd have that with
Inside a cabinet.
with the humidity.
You're right. Not inside a cabinet.
Inside a cabinet. But maybe
I don't know.
maybe the screw. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Well, again, that's you guys. Can
Come
join
on,
the
guys,
crowd.
we can-
I don't know.
We can figure this out right now.
Let's all bust out our certificates of ignorance and figure this out. That is really cool.
That is great.
So I love we love the anomalies, like these strange, unexplained.
A big part of this podcast is looking at anomalous reports of things just like that from all across time, and so.
And your observation about maybe something like this, not this, but something like this, could be tied back in antiquity to the actual genesis of
the legends themselves.
the legends of the Djinn.
Yeah,
that's
that is cool.
That's
to
an
me.
interesting idea.
I think that's really cool. I love that kind of stuff. I'm sort of like what we call the scriptard. That's my job on the podcast, is to be the skeptic. I'm like, okay, this can be explained with physics, right?
Yeah, and I'm over here like, come on, guy. We know that this was a spirit being setting things on fire. But yes, so if that's the case, like what Kyle was saying, how interesting is it that you as a geologist and a scientist and another scientist get called out to an area to investigate something that the locals are calling something from ancient myth, and what you end up investigating may be the source of that myth itself.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's just really cool.
Yeah. We wound up in the end admitting defeat on the ignition part. So
Yeah.
We just can't figure it out. We don't know. But we said
Gotta rub the lamp.
with that
Static charge.
static. Had two Johnsons rubbing her leg together. Okay. We wound up saying, because we couldn't explain it, and it seemed to be continuing, and there was this garbage dump that had been buried that was a source, we said, it's not going to stop more than like once it starts.
Yeah.
Something's been opened up, and it's not going to stop.
Yeah.
The government wound up forcing every family to leave, razed that whole thing, razed it to the ground, then built them a whole new set of buildings and stuff in another area.
So no more reports from that area.
Never heard another word from that. And I don't know if that's because
Everybody
nothing
got moved
happened
out.
or if the government just said, it doesn't matter, we're not talking about it anymore. But the local police were absolutely convinced that it was just, like I said, they'd seen all this stuff before, and they knew what they knew.
Yeah.
And it was a Djinn.
Yeah. I mean, chasing a flame across the desert, that's pretty
Freaky.
Yeah. And,
And going as fast as a car.
right. Yeah. That sounds like ball lightning.
A green
right?
flame on the ground.
Yeah.
What element burns green? Copper?
Copper.
I was thinking probably copper.
Watcher? He figured it out. Oh wait, he's what's he
Watcher's
got to
over
say?
here telling us the answers.
We're not even looking at the screen that way.
The other thing I was thinking of is, have you guys heard of the Marfa lights? This is in Texas, Marfa, Texas.
But I've always heard them from kind of a science fiction-y sort of thing is what I've heard them in reference, kind of relate to. Is that what you've...
Well, I mean, like what I'm thinking of is, some of the explanations that aren't like, oh, they're just cars way off in the desert, because that's clearly wrong, because some of them are up in the sky.
Yeah.
But is that it's piezoelectric effects, possibly, and so it generates like what looks like ball lightning just above the surface. And like they're it's not clear if they happen during the day, but the people mostly see them at dusk, right? And we know that there's this, when the sun is going down, there's this enormous electropotential thing moving across the landscape, as the sun goes down into shadow, just because of the heat and all this kind of stuff. And so the ground is all shifting and changing.
That's fine.
Yeah. And so people think that it may be ball lightning out there that's being formed by enormous crystal deposits beneath the desert floor.
Is this a fairly new theory?
Yeah,
that's been around for a while.
Well,
to be honest, I hadn't heard of a piezoelectric source for that.
Yeah,
and I find that interesting.
It's just a guess, It's a guess. Like people are speculating. Obviously, maybe if there's enough crystal deposits beneath the desert somewhere down there, and they're under stress, or as you go from day when everything's hot to night, and it suddenly starts to cool down and it's fast, that there's stresses put on crystals, and that ends up generating what looks like ball lightning.
There's no doubt whatsoever that crystalline structures underground, under stress, are going to be producing electrical potential.
That's right.
Whether or not that forms luminous phenomena in the sky above, that's the
one knows that. Yeah,
that's the big
that's
like
the big
unknown
speculation,
question, right?
Yeah.
That's the big speculation.
Yeah.
But earthquake lights. Have you heard of this? This is another thing that a lot of people report.
No.
Just before earthquakes happen, and sometimes during and after, people report seeing luminous phenomena above the ground, in the sky, or around the area. And then there's a big earthquake. Like there was a pretty big earthquake in Colorado in 2012-ish, a while back. And between an hour and a half an hour before the earthquake, all around the area where that happened, there were very loud noises that people heard that sound like, something pounding against stone, big booming sounds. This was before the earthquake hit. Other people report seeing lights in the sky. And of course, we all know animals freak out long before the earthquake itself hits. So I'm just thinking about this. Like you said that the whole area there is all faulted.
Yep.
And it sounds to me like something like that could be going on, some complex series of systems that ends up.
Well, to me, in that area at least, and I'm not denying anything that you've said, but
sure.
In that area, I see the faulting just acting as a conduit
for the gas.
To get the gases
produced
out.
deep. Gas is produced at 10,000 feet to get it to the surface.
Right.
One of the things that I know for sure, though, is, like you say, those phenomena that are lights are associated with earthquakes all over the world.
Right.
Those are, for whatever reason.
Right. And one of the ideas is that there's crystalline structures in the ground, and the earthquake is putting stress on those, and it generates somehow. I don't know how this would translate to lights on the surface or above it, but I have no idea. I'm just speculating about if it is something like ball lightning, which is some kind of electrical phenomena. That's an ignition source for gases that are coming up through faults.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
This is still fascinating.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I mean, it's to Djinn. This is the answer.
Yeah.
we
We just solved what the Djinn are. Next mystery.
Yeah.
Next mystery.
Yeah, that's an interesting things going on there.
Here's before we move on from that story, the question I have, you've shown us this report. Mm-hmm. Is it still classified or
No, not at all.
Do you have a digital version of it?
I do not. I have a paper copy and I have slides.
Okay.
Can you digitize it there, Sean?
I think so.
All right.
Because I would love to just put that up.
It's an interesting report.
So people can read it, because a lot of the Snake Force would read that report.
Because it has the
the
analysis of the water. It's real boring in one sense, but it's really interesting in another, because it's pictures of what burned. It's analysis of the groundwater, analysis of the ground. Shows burn. It shows burn patterns. And it shows how the burn patterns do not match what you'd expect from arson patterns, that sort of thing. So it's really...
That would be great. Bringing you classified documents, folks.
We'll get it to you. Get it to you.
Heck yes. And a bowl of arrowheads.
That's right.
That's all we're asking. We went over to his house to have a chat about doing the podcast and see some of his artifacts, and Laura was telling us, like, oh my God, he has so many badass artifacts. So we go over there, and sure enough, like he's
Yeah,
got
I'm thinking like, okay, he's got a couple.
Yeah,
of
he's got
seen
these
people's arrowhead
He's got these
collections.
cases of artifacts, and they're just amazing. But then he's got these bowls, like huge kitchen, mixing bowls, just full of perfect arrowheads.
Yeah.
And he's just like grabbing
There's
by
so
hand.
many of them.
So
They're
these
like,
are
there's
just-
a bowl in the bathroom. You go in there and it's like, oh, there's a bowl full of perfect arrowheads.
And we're going to talk about those next. Yeah.
I was so jealous. And then when he was telling us the story about finding him, I was like, stop telling me this story.
Yeah. I hate you. We're leaving.
Just kind of a final thing on this. The area on the edge of the Red Sea is called, on this side that we're talking going into Saudi Arabia, is called the Asir Plateau. It's where you've had some uplift and the road and everything. The Asir Plateau is where he was talking about. So this village is right next to the Asir Plateau. And that's where I was telling you where all of the our people now are going looking for gold and silver in the rocks there, and they're very, very frustrated because that's where the ancients have gone through 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, and absolutely cleaned it out. They found every deposit of gold, every gold deposit of gold and silver that we could have found, they'd found already. Wow. And so it's really interesting how the people that long ago were that good at figuring out where these precious metals were.
Okay, so the gold is in quartz veins, or are these gold nuggets that are deposited in
These are more
ancient
what's called
rivers?
hydrothermal, so they'd be in veins. They'd be carried in hot waters, and as hot waters evaporate, they go in veins, and they would deposit the whatever metals in it, and it's gold or silver. And that's how they do it. And it's in quartz. The quartz would also be they'd be carried with water.
Yeah.
And these hot waters, because they can absorb more, they can carry more. But
questions on that, because we've always wondered, like, do you know the way, like, how you would look as a geologist on the surface for signs, like where you'd say there might be gold here or silver? What do you look like? What do you look for? Do you know?
You go and look for certain kinds of what's called country rock, or certain kinds of rock, and you look for fracturing, and then you just hope there's something there. There's nothing magic. You look for the most likely places. And
Wait, there's no magic? All right, let's move on. Forget
about there's no Djinn leading you into this saying a smoky finger here, the smoky finger of the devil.
But the ancients were clearly good at this, right?
They were very, very good at it, and you don't know if there was 10,000 of them going over this whole area, which is 1,000 kilometers long.
Yeah.
Just tooth and nail, so that every crook and cranny they're in, or if somebody
knew what they were doing.
Some precious metal wizard was just saying, go here and go here and go here. I don't know. All I know is that we have, if you go back and look at a map of that area, there's a ton of of ancient mines that have the symbol we have for ancient mines all down that thing. And every one of those places where we too would have gone to get gold or silver.
Wow.
It's just really interesting that they just were that
amazing.
good that long ago.
So that's, just going back to the piezoelectric hypothesis, there's a bunch of quartz underground.
Absolutely. Quartz veins, yes.
Okay.
Well, so another question. You say that everywhere we would have gone, they've already mined it out. Maybe you guys didn't notice this, but did you see where they dug tunnels there and we wouldn't have dug tunnels there?
Where did they fail?
Yeah.
There were, I'm sure there were. By the very nature of the thing, we don't really care about the failures. It's the successes that we care about.
Yeah, I'm just interested because I would like to know how good they were at figuring out where they were. Because if there's very few failures, but you're like, okay, everywhere we would have gone, they went, but everywhere we wouldn't have gone, they didn't go. That's really interesting.
I can't tell you that.
Okay, all right.
All I know is that they cleaned it out, and that whether that was almost a 1-to-1 effort where they went, or if it was 10,000 failures to one success, I don't know.
Yeah, you know about the Michigan area copper mines, they're very ancient. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. There's somebody a long time ago mined a lot of copper out of there. And I mean, they I've heard some archaeologists estimate that it would have taken 10,000 men, 1,000 years to do the amount of work that they find in that area.
I don't know.
And I mean, who was doing that in the Americas? That's an interesting question too. I mean, I know that's not Europe. I'm just saying
to wonder
that
where that copper went? Who is using
Right.
that amount?
There's not a lot of copper artifacts here.
No.
So it may have been fueling the Bronze Age. This is some people's idea because the timelines match. Somebody was coming over here and fueling the Bronze Age that happened in the Old World from New World copper.
Like you say, the timelines
Yeah.
match up. What that says, though, is there's a whole bunch of stuff was going on a lot earlier than we thought it was.
That's right.
A lot of traveling from east to west and west to east.
Transatlantic, yeah. Shipping.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're talking about moving that much copper,
how
you're
do you
talking about
get-
shipping.
And if you assume it's all by sail, then how do you get to the doldrum areas and the horse latitudes and all that stuff? There's tons of problems with
That's
that.
right.
You know?
Yeah. Yep.
Don't know.
Yeah, we don't either. But it's one of the questions.
I mean, I was reading an article recently about sea level rise in a specific place in the Atlantic.
Okay.
And, you know, it was correlated to global warming and all that. But I was thinking, like, could this be isostatic change just in a particular area that we're observing now, right? There's these motions going on all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if even, you know, in the Bronze Age, we're not going back to the Younger Dryas, but we're going back far enough to maybe a time when there was a different isostatic situation that might have made travel across the Atlantic easier than it is now. Think that's a possibility? Would it be evident to geologists?
Would there be much ice at the time you're talking about? Or
In the
would ice be
Bronze
gone?
Age?
No.
Be gone?
It would be comparable to now, pretty much. Yeah.
Gone. I say because there's theories about going back and forth, following
The currents would be changed in the
Yeah.
ice age. Yeah.
following the currents, or not the currents, but just going across the sheets of ice
Oh.
from Europe to America, going right along that edge. And that wouldn't fit this situation at all.
Yeah, I was thinking of like island chains being accessible, making travel across there easier at that time. So there's still a rebound going on, you know, since the end of the last ice age.
It's exposing more and more land, yeah. In
Right.
those smaller areas.
And so whatever the situation was back then made it easier to sail over here. But I don't even know when the Bronze Age. What time period was that? Do you know?
Watcher. When was the Bronze Age? I mean, I'm thinking 4,000 to 2,000 BC or something like that, but it's probably later than that. I'm not sure.
I'm just wondering if significant changes could happen in that amount of time to make a difference in the travel.
2,000 to 0.
Would that give you enough time? Would that give you enough time to have quarried all the copper that was taken?
That's true.
Because that's not going to happen quickly. That takes a lot of time.
That's right.
Yeah, if you don't have like heavy equipment, it takes a lot of time. That's the other question we often ask on this podcast is do these people have some machinery that we just don't know about, or like maybe not reciprocating engines, but okay, yeah, 3,000 BC to 1,200 BC, Bronze Age. So that we're long out of the Ice Age here in that case.
So it's 5,000 to 3,200 years ago. Okay.
Yeah. So not much ice, but it is. I mean, we know that isostatic response from the ice sheets disappearing is still taking place today in some places.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering is there a way to
Yeah.
know how different it was back then? Like, is it easily detectable that it could have been so drastically different that travel across the Atlantic would have been easy at that time?
Yeah, he asks,
know.
why does the Bronze Age predate the Iron Age? Iron has to be smelted. I don't know. Well, bronze does too. You have to mix it, copper with tin. Right
So many
time?
questions.
So many questions. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be back shortly to talk more geology and strange mysteries. Welcome back. ladies and gentlemen. Second half of the show, third segment. This is the Snake Bros Institute for Advanced Coprolite Studies, where there are no degrees, only certificates of ignorance that you have to print yourself. We have been joined by an excellent guest telling us amazing stories of all the travels he's done looking at geology and strange Djinn mysteries.
And we're drinking some wonderful Wolf Hollow Brewing Company beers.
That's right.
Sent by the brew pastor.
Absolutely excellent.
Much appreciated,
Excellent.
sir.
So where are we going next? What's the next topic?
Let's move a little bit more to the east into the Rubicali. One of the areas that we did a lot of traveling in is the Rubicali. It's also known as the Empty Quarter. It's the southern part of the Arabian Plate. It's about 250,000 square miles. And it includes southern part of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, parts of Yemen, Oman, Abu Dhabi, in that area. It's a trackless waste that just is phenomenal in and of itself. There's a road that goes down there. We'd start out, it's about a 1,400 kilometer trek for us. And we'd head west to a town called Layla. And then we'd head south down towards Yemen. The Rubicali is known for its sand dunes. I was telling Colin Russ earlier, the sand dunes are the small ones are about 200 feet high. God. The big ones are between 700 and 800 feet high. And it's a phenomenal trip to go down there. We probably went down 5 times. When you go down there and you're looking for arrowheads, we go down in caravans. There'd be 3, 4, 5 vehicles, families. And you always wound up getting people that had the same kind of vehicle that you did. Because then you get together ahead of time and you made sure everybody had different kinds of spare parts. So you always had spare parts that could do one vehicle.
Wow.
So we all had, the ones that we had were Suburbans. And everybody had air pumps built in so you can inflate your tires, because when you get off the road, what we do is we go down to Yemen. We literally go down to Yemen. The road would hit a T, and it would parallel the Yemen border. And that town was called Najran. And you would then come back some distance. We always had Landsat photos, color-enhanced Landsat photos, and we had gotten to the point where we could pick out lake beds on these Landsat
probably
photos.
Pre-Google Earth, like you were.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
We didn't have GPS.
So Landsat photos. This is a photograph.
This is a computer-enhanced photo that's been taken from Landsat photos. It's a computer-enhanced photo that we had enlarged, made into it. It's just satellites.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
And because it was color enhanced, you could then pick out different features. Mm-hmm. And we could pick out lake beds in between the sand dunes, these massive, massive sand dunes. And so we would go down to, and you could see the road, the roads, the highways on the Landsat photo. So we go down to the end of the road where it teed. Any further, you're in Yemen. And we inadvertently multiple times went into Yemen, didn't even know we were in Yemen, looking for things. But we then come back along the road that we can see on the Landsat photo, and we count dunes up, count a certain number of dunes up, and we knew where we wanted to go. We would then go off the road, this 4 or 5 vehicles.
Like going between the dunes?
We'd pick a dune, and we go in between the dune.
Okay.
And we carried all the water and food and gas that we needed for a week. And we go off-road for a week at a time. We deflate the tires down to about 12 to 15 PSI. That we all had tires that were a foot wide, 12-inch wide tires. We deflate those. And then we would go in between the dunes. And we would go hundreds of kilometers down these dunes. And we would change dunes sometimes. We'd go to a certain thing. We said, all right, we want to change it. We look at the map.
Yeah.
And we shift. And we go up, climb the dunes, and we go down to another dune. And we're gone for a week at a time. And then we would come back out to this road, we inflate our tires, we'd go up and we'd get more gas or whatever we had to do. And then we'd go back in and do whatever, go back into the dunes again. The lake beds that we were looking for first of all, the sand dunes started, I think, around 70,000 years ago, plus or minus, was when these sand dunes, they started having the sand, because again, this is an area where you start to see these changes in climate. And
isn't there a question of where the sand came from? Like, if it used to be savanna, like, it's strange that there's all this sand there now. I mean, I've heard this before. I'm not sure.
Well, yes, there is.
Okay.
There's got to be a source for this, and generally it's a classic versus a carbonate. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but when you
we'll go in the weeds.
Okay. Going in the weeds here, diving. We're going down.
Yeah.
Okay. In the Upper Cretaceous and into the Eocene, you started to see, when I was talking about earlier, where you had the water going out, where you had sea level dropping. That was a time that was called a warm mode or a warm period, and with that marine, with the marine influence there, what you were depositing was carbonates.
Carbonates.
Right.
Okay.
Once you drop down below a certain level, and like, for example, when the
water drops down to a certain level?
As the level drops down below a certain level, for example, there is no Oligocene sediment there. There just was nothing being deposited. But what is being deposited, whether it's the Miocene or whatever, are now clastics. That's the sandstone and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Now that's where if you break up, you deposit the sandstones, and you make the sand because you just have the wave action that's breaking.
Yeah.
rock
Okay.
out.
Okay, it's the wave. So once there's this eustatic change, right?
Yeah.
Sea level going down.
Or it can be when you're starting to put water into ice. Okay. So you can be sucking the water up into the Antarctic.
Yeah, it's evaporating, yes.
Yes. So you have this in the, once you go out of the late Cretaceous, the Eocene, you go into the rest of the Cenozoic, you start to go into what's called a cooler period, and that's when you have these clastics. And that, more than likely, for at least some, if not all of these sandstones came from over time.
Okay.
So that would be the source. In any case, I think it's around 70,000 years ago, you started to see these bigger dunes starting to develop. Between 37,000 years and 17,000 years, so that's a 20,000 year period, you had lakes developing in this area too. The lakes were mostly ephemeral. That means they didn't last very long.
Right.
And they were sourced water-wise. They were sourced by monsoons, they think, because of the geologic signature that you're getting at the time. What you're seeing is massive amounts of water being deposited, being dropped in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
So
torrential rains,
which is not at all what they have now. So again, we're looking at massive climate change. In any case, for about 20,000 years, you had these lakes being formed. There's at least 1,000 have been identified so far. And when you see them in between these dunes, people that lived there in the last, say, 5,000 to 7,000 years, maybe 8,000 years, because they kind of tie in with the Saharan people's timing, they would hunt these lakes. And so the lakes may or may not have fish, depending on how long they had been there, but they certainly would have birds. And they had a lot of they'd have rush and brush and things there. And so they would hunt birds, and they would be chipping these small, what they call bird points, to hunt these lakes. You had a period then where it kind of dried up. And then somewhere around 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, 10,000 to 5,000 years ago is when you had a second series of lakes. And that's really where a lot of the bird points and stuff would be this second period of lakes. We have no evidence of man in these earlier ones. So kind of go back. We have one set of lakes starts between 37,000 and 17,000 years ago. You have a break of about 7,000 years where you have a really change in the environment, the climate. From 10,000 to 5,000 years, you have...
So after the Younger Dryas.
The Younger Dryas.
The lakes
comes
start
back
coming back.
Come back again. And those are the ones where we see a lot of the arrowheads that I have. The bird points, the smaller points, the bird points, that sort of thing. And it's... we would drive off in the desert, and we would find what we call virgin sites. And we'd pick them out. We'd pick out sites, likely sites on our Landsat photos. Again, don't forget, we had no GPS, anything like that. We had compasses and maps. So we'd find these sites, and sometimes they'd been found previously and been picked over. We would just keep on going. And when we found a virgin site, and my son Sean will back me up on this, we find a virgin site, and it's just in between, it's a little bit sandy area in between a dune, and something the size of a football field, maybe doubled, would literally have one arrowhead on the surface every square foot. A perfect arrowhead. And we would wind up taking large fanny packs back, 4 and 5, 6, 7, 8 fanny packs back of just the arrowheads. And it got to the point where if it's not perfect, we didn't keep it. It wasn't worth keeping, so we, throw it back for the next.
I don't think I've ever found an actual perfect arrowhead in my life.
and
get out of here.
It was really interesting. So we wound up, and we would drive these areas. We wound up going in different things, and you'd find arrowheads. And I don't know, I think I've showed you guys some of the bigger spear points or scraper points, but they're the size of half my forearm.
Yeah.
And they're just really, really incredible pieces. As good, probably, as you'll find in many museums.
Yeah.
We just have sitting in our house.
They're just gorgeous.
You can vouch for that, for sure.
So,
and he throws them around
G10.
like
G10.
Yeah.
So we go down there, and like I say, there are areas down there where also there are these pictographs or whatever you want to call them.
Petroglyphs.
Petroglyphs, pictographs, yeah.
We call them pictographs.
But hold on. So they're playas, they're dry lake beds. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
And you were looking on the basically what would have been the shoreline of this lake?
Not even shoreline. It wasn't enough. It wasn't big enough to have a shoreline.
Oh, okay.
Literally, it would be
Like a very large pond or something.
Yeah,
Okay.
like maybe 100 yards across. Well, I don't know. I don't know if it was a pond or not, or if we just were in an area that there was something at the surface.
Yeah.
So the lakes are generally a little bit longer because they're in between the dunes. So they're kind of linear, paralleling the dunes.
So they were forming when the dunes were already there? Because you're saying 70,000 years ago.
The dunes started about 70,000 years ago, but then they're being filled by these, like I say, these torrential rains coming down. That's the best guess we have. And a guy that I worked with did a PhD thesis on it out of the University of
Okay, I understand
London.
now. I understand
And that was his takeaway on
You're not talking about like there's some sub dune surface that has playas on it that the dunes are moving across. You're saying that the dunes were already there and their lakes were forming. Now the dunes are still moving, but every once in a while they'll uncover an area where like there was a lake there.
Yeah, at one time.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And the second lakes, the second set of lakes, the younger set, oftentimes were found more. Oddly enough, were found more on top of the dunes. So if you have a dune, but there's a kind of a depression in the dune, they would find a lake on top of that.
Wow.
It's really weird.
Yeah.
And then as the dune moves, of course, you lose that.
Yeah.
So all you have is stuff being dumped in the lower ones.
How long does it take for those dunes to kind of move?
God, I don't know. They don't.
It's not fast, but they are.
No.
I mean, I guess if you could have like a time lapse photo of hundreds of years, they would be moving like waves, right?
Yeah. inches a year. Inches a year. I don't know.
Yeah. Inches per year. Damn.
We were coming. I was going to tell you guys some of the stories we had. We were coming down. We're cranking down this highway heading south towards Yemen, and we're all doing 70, 80 miles an hour, and we're going up and down these dunes. It's like this huge roller coaster ride. Literally, you go crest a dune, you go down 200, 300, 400, 500 feet, and you come up and the road was pretty well maintained. So you have this asphalt road going through these dunes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we come whipping up over the top of this one dune, and there is this young man wearing an orange jumpsuit, and he had a little stacked there. The workers all came out of India or Sri Lanka, places like that. He had a can. His meal was in these little stacked cans that they have. He's sitting on the side of the road when he had a big bottle of water. And I swear to God, he had a broom, an industrial-sized broom. It was a big broom. And he's sweeping the sand off the side of the road in this
What?
massive area. And we come whipping by him, and he's waving and smiling, and we're thinking, where is this guy from that this is a good job? But he was there. That was his job. They drop him off in the morning.
Street sweeper.
A street sweeper.
Yeah.
They drop him off in the morning. They pick him up at the end of the day, and he's just sweeping away on the side of the road.
Maybe he was picking up arrowheads, going back and selling them.
Maybe he was rubbing rocks together, trying to get things to burn. I don't know.
Golly, that's
True story.
crazy.
Wow. Yeah, we're going to send you out in this sand ocean, and we want you to sweep the road.
Yeah. Here's your chore for the day.
Yeah.
We did a lot of traveling when we were there in Saudi Arabia. Saudi was...
This is good. Real quick from the Watcher. In Qatar, an approximately 16-foot high dune may move at a speed of about 65 feet per year, and a 98-foot high dune moves at 16 feet per year.
I didn't know that. I would not think the dunes that we're driving on
way
400 to 600 to 800 foot dunes.
if only because the roads were in such good shape.
Well, here we have we could graph this out.
Do some math.
Do some math. And we can come up with a number.
Come up with a trend line, and we'll figure it out.
God,
All right, that's your job, Watcher.
You really are geeking out on this.
No, dude,
Yeah,
we're straight up geeks here.
Okay, I don't know. My feeling is they don't move particularly
Yeah, if there's
fast
a maintained road,
because the roads are maintained.
I totally agree. Yeah.
So anyway, one of the things we did a lot of traveling when we were there, and we were talking about this before we started this segment. We again did a lot of touring to Turkey and places, but probably one of my all-time favorite places that we visited was Baalbek. And Baalbek was spectacular. We loved it.
Yeah.
When we went there, we stayed. And for those of you who don't know what it is, look it up, man, because it's worth looking at.
Just anybody in the audience that doesn't know what it is, leave the audience. Because you should know what it is by now. Just get out of here. Stop listening.
When we showed up there was this little German hotel that we stayed at, and it overlooked Baalbek in the valley. And so we actually just look out. We're sitting there eating dinner on this nice little terrace kind of thing, and look over, and we could see the ruins within less than a quarter of a mile. It was just spectacular. The kids hated it. So we had these nice European
What's
meals.
wrong with you, Ben?
Yeah, these guys hate it. So we said, well, why don't you guys go on up? There's that military camp up there. They got pizza places up there. Just go on up and get some pizza and stuff and enjoy that. You have pizza, we'll do this other stuff. We and we did that, 3-4 nights, something like that, because the kids liked the pizza and we liked where we were staying. We went back to Saudi Arabia and we were watching Saudi TV one night, and they started talking about issues in the Bekaa Valley, where this is all it is. And incredibly, they showed Baalbek, and they showed this pizza place because it was right next to this Hamas camp, the military camp that we thought was. And so we're sending our 10 and 12-year-olds up to have pizza
With Hamas.
We were terrible parents.
That's how we referred to. We were in the break, and he was like, "What was the name of that place? The ruins next to the pizza place."
Yeah,
And once we figured out that it was we're like, "Wait, you're talking about Baalbek?"
it's the pizza ruins.
Yeah. So from now on, the ruins next to the pizza place is how we're going to refer to Baalbek.
That's right.
That's the true landmark.
That's right.
I hate to think of that. The other story that's really interesting, and this is just a local, and I'll tell them about the doctor. This is just of local interest.
Local to here.
Huh?
Local to here, yeah.
In Bandera.
That's right.
My personal physician is Dr. Jafar. Great guy. Love him. He's
Yeah.
a good guy. And I was in seeing him a few months ago, and we got to talking, and I said, we've done a lot of traveling in the Middle East. And he said, yeah, well, he's just kind of listening and doing his stuff. I said, yeah, we went to Malta, a lot of time in Turkey, and we've been to Iran. And but we really like Baalbek. And he looked at me, and he goes, Baalbek? I said, yeah, Baalbek. He goes, I am from Baalbek. He said, that's where I grew up, and that's where my clan, he referred to it as his clan. That's where his clan is.
We are going to have to get Jafar on the
this
show.
podcast. That's right.
He
Holy
would
crap.
love it. He would love it.
Man,
He's a cool guy. Cool guy.
Yeah, I know he was a cool guy, but I did not know that part about him. That's fascinating. Hear that, folks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great pizza place there.
It's a really good pizza place.
So when we
Baalbek pizza.
Biggest pizza you'll ever eat.
Baalbek by the slice.
Yeah. So did you go to the quarry that's nearby with the stone of the what they call the stone of the pregnant woman or what, that enormous block? It's
Where some of the stuff has been, they think, was sourced, where the ramp is.
Yeah.
Yes.
that thing
Baalbek
is like 60 feet long, 19 feet wide. Yeah, that block where you're like, okay.
No, are you talking about the block that was quarried and is part of the base?
Now, wait a second.
Or are you talking about...
You called it a ramp. Was it not excavated back then? 'Cause
Maybe not.
It looks like a ramp.
It's so enormous. It
but
looks like
they've
a stone
since
ramp.
excavated it and it's a block.
Okay.
That was not taken
I'm
to the
talking
site.
about something different.
Okay.
In the actual built into the Baalbek structure on one side
Yes.
is probably the biggest quarried piece.
Yeah, the trilithon.
Is that what you're talking about? You're not
Those are,
talking about that.
well, those are similar because they look like the block that's still in the quarry looks like it was going to be one like those. There's 3 of them and they're gigantic.
Okay, yeah.
They're in like a retaining wall around the outside of the
huge. Yes, yes.
That's right. Yeah. Those they clearly whoever's building the place moved them from the quarry and put them in the wall. But in the quarry itself, there's a block. I don't know obviously I don't know the translation is there's multiple ones, but one of the ones that most people know is Stone of the Pregnant Woman. It's just enormous. It's 60 feet long, 19 feet wide, 16 feet tall or something like that. It weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. Recently, some German archaeologists have been digging around it because it's when you look at the pictures of it, yeah, there it is. It's coming out of the ground there. You can see how big it is with the guy standing on it. Watcher showing us a picture. So they've dug around this now because they thought a lot of people were saying, well, they never finished quarrying it. It's still attached to the rock. Well, they started digging around it and they found out that it's actually sitting on top of 2 blocks that are even bigger than that one.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's new. That's new.
The ones that are underneath this one are estimated to weigh between 1,600 to 1,800 tons.
Oh my God.
So whoever was cutting these blocks out of the quarry and then moving them over the ridge and to the site and then stacking them on top of things
Without breaking them.
Yeah.
You can break. That's incredible.
Yeah.
What?
That's a whole lot of pizza going there. Yeah, no, I had not. I had seen where they had talked about moving those things in. Then what I was talking about was moving them down on a ramp, cutting them and then moving them.
Yeah.
A ramp. I thought they had a ramp built to move them down. Now that's different from what I had seen.
Yeah, there's the trilithon. You can see the big 3 enormous blocks right there across the top.
But isn't the one that caps him that's going kind of perpendicular even bigger?
There's
one there that is the biggest to date. The man-made one that's in a structure, I think.
Yeah. Yes. It's the largest cut-in-place stone in the world found ever.
In a structure.
Yeah, that's right.
I agree.
Yeah, it's one of those 3 blocks that are on the top.
You can spend days going through
Yeah.
Baalbek and just seeing all of the things. And if you go there, I don't know if they're still having it. I think they are. Have you heard of the Baalbek Music Festival?
No.
They have
Serious rock and roll.
I don't think so.
Oh, yeah, we have a band. We can go.
They have an annual music festival there. That is where they take in one of the big areas on the inside. They move a bunch of seats in and then light it up. It is spectacular.
Oh, wow.
Just spectacular.
So you've looked at the Temple of Jupiter.
Yep.
Those I guess there's just the 6 columns left. Those things are enormous too. And then there's the Temple of Bacchus.
Bacchus.
Yeah.
That's when it has the columns
is-
leaning on the side.
Yeah,
leaning against it.
It's still mostly intact. Probably the roof is gone,
Yes.
but it's I mean, and those things, Bacchus is Greek, Jupiter, Roman, but this, no one, when you really think about it, you can see the guy. Watcher showing us pictures here.
That is huge.
That guy. And look, structurally, you see the blocks beneath are not as big as the trilithon blocks that are across the top of it, but they have this expanding base.
Yes.
And so it's just, and you can see how much older they are based on the erosion than the blocks above it that are still enormous. Those blocks up there are gigantic. But those things,
For an engineering point of view, you'd almost have to have that expanding base just to make it stable.
Yeah.
So from an engineering point of view,
That's right.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's just, and it's the question is, it's like, what was this for? Why do you need? This is one of the questions I know you don't have the answers. I'm just saying, like, we just look at this and you're just, we call these impossiblocks. They're so big, that they're just impossible. Yeah. Impossible to figure out. Why did they need them? Who put them there? How old are they? Look at the erosion on those blocks compared to the ones above it. It's just
yeah. If I can, let's take a shift here. I'm
sure,
Baalbek,
no problem.
I love Baalbek. Is the one place I would go back to.
Yeah,
we had issues there. Well, actually, have you ever heard of a castle called Crac du Chevalier?
Don't recognize that one.
Crac du Chevalier is in Syria, and it's right on the kind of the plain on the Mediterranean, and it's probably the best preserved Crusader castle in the world. Huge, absolutely, and spectacular to see. It's not nearly as obviously as old as this stuff, but it's still just a set of ruins. It's spectacular.
Right. Yeah.
So you can go from like from north to south, or we could until they had the Civil War going on. You start up in what's the city up north in Syria, the one that the fighting's going on. I'll think of the name.
I don't know that. Yeah.
Anyway, you work your way south. You hit this fabulous Crusader castle. Then you keep moving south. You go from Syria into Lebanon, and you go to this. It's just a spectacular series of places to go. So Petra's in that proximity, and all these kinds of things. Petra's spectacular.
You been to Petra?
Oh yeah. God, a couple times. Petra is just spectacular.
Yeah. Those are rock cut. That's there we go.
I love it. So
Indiana Jones.
One of the other areas that we visited was Iran. We went to Iran a couple different times, and this was really, really good thing. And for the watcher, if you would please, would you pull up a photo of Persepolis? Have you guys heard of Persepolis?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
So we started in the south, go by Shiraz, and that's where Persepolis is. Persepolis is the ruins, I think, of Xerxes. Was it Xerxes?
I don't know. Watcher will figure that out.
Yeah,
and the ruins were buried for a long, long time. They've only recently been excavated. So the kind of detail we see in the carvings and stuff.
Right, because they were protected.
They were protected. You see, so they have African slaves been covered. You still see the real tight curly hair, curving and stuff. It's spectacular, just spectacular. I don't know if it's Darius or Xerxes. And then from there, we moved up. We went to Isfahan, which is called a spectacular city. And then we went from there to Tehran. The whole time that we were there this first time, we wound up having our own tour. We set up a tour through a tour guide. And we had a young man who was the driver. And he and I got to talking on the first day. And it turns out he too was a geologist. And geologists couldn't find work in Iran. So
oh man.
So there was nothing to do. So he and I talked about geology, the Zagros mountain chain, all that stuff the whole time. Geology.
Man, that's great.
So it's pretty cool.
Just two geologists on a road trip.
Yeah. Boring my wife to death.
Yeah, talking about rocks.
So coming out of Saudi Arabia was, like I say, my wife just didn't even want to go down to Oman anymore. Went to Oman, Abu Dhabi. We go across into India. Did a lot of trips to India, and that stuff. So we traveled a lot.
Yeah.
When we were there in India, there's a whole series of spectacular ruins you guys need to be, if you haven't done India yet, you need to do. Nope. There are cities that have been discovered in 200 feet of water.
Yep.
And are just being excavated now. That sort of thing. It tells you some of the mythology coming out of India, maybe more than
is
mythology.
telling. What do you make of that as a geologist? That a city is in 200 feet of water.
That tells me that city is a whole lot older. You have to push civilization back a whole lot further than we are probably willing to do right now.
Yep.
to be able to justify a city in 200 feet of water. Because for 200 feet of water, that's a lot of time. Because what you've done is you've sucked that water up into ice in the Antarctic and the Arctic, and when you're thinking back on the time frame, when you look at a timeline of when you had that kind of ice buildup in the Antarctic, which is probably where most of it would be, it's a while. So I find those things very interesting, and I don't know what to make of them.
Yeah.
But they're there. They're absolutely there.
Yeah, some of the recent stuff we've seen on the end of the Younger Dryas is that starting with the, I guess, Meltwater Pulse 1A, which is, I don't know, that would be before the Younger Dryas, and then coming up to after the Younger Dryas, the sea levels rose 400 feet. So so somewhere in that process, you get 200 feet down, and then you have
Darius. Yeah.
there it is, Darius the Great.
So what is this, Persepolis? What did you call it?
Persepolis.
Persepolis. I think Persepolis is some kind of weird head problem.
Yeah. I thought it was an ear infection.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, that's all been uncovered in the last probably 20, 25 years, 30 years, maybe 50 years.
Yeah, it is. It does look very pristine.
And it's huge.
Is that a palace or what?
Say again, please.
Is that a palace?
Yes, parts of it were palace and just a city.
Yeah, an entire city.
Yeah, so we're basically looking at foundations, probably, right?
This is the city of the guy who was fighting the Trojans.
Spartans?
The Spartans. This is back in that time.
Yeah.
This guy or his father were fighting Spartans.
This is from the movie The 300, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be,
That's exactly
that kind of thing.
near to Xerxes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Persians. Yeah,
Xerxes.
look at that. Man. Did he pull up the overhead of Baalbek up there?
Yeah, but it wasn't a good one, Watcher.
Yeah, what's
Come
wrong
on.
with you, Watcher?
I want to
Come
see the guy
on.
holding a beer.
That's not the right.
Show me the one that looks like a guy holding a beer. But here it is. Here's his head. It's partly out of the frame. Shoulders. His arms are coming down. Here's his legs, sort of Lego man style.
Yeah,
And then,
the
of course,
platform from above is shaped like a person.
shaped like a man with holding a bag or a handbag or a beer
bucket
or something.
or
a
something.
bucket.
Yeah.
How many carvings are there, ancient carvings of a figure holding a handbag?
Right, exactly.
That is in culture
Man
after
knows.
culture
The
after
man
culture.
knows.
Culture after culture after shows a handbag.
That's right. All right, we got to take our final break. We'll be back. Sticks!
Final segment of the final hour of Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and opening my final Brewcaster beer.
Is that the last one?
No.
Okay.
No, my final one for the show.
All right.
No, we got. There's like two more in there.
He looks over to where they were, and there's none over there.
I wonder, why did he look at me?
God dang it, Johnson! You drank all our beers.
I got the American Double IPA, Wolf Hollow Brewing Company. So this is the Pulpit Supply from the Brewcaster.
All right.
And in the Tangent Cube with the Johnsons. Getting ready to get back into it. So we were going to shift gears a little bit and talk about geologic change, climate changes throughout Earth history.
And catastrophic changes.
And catastrophic changes,
yeah.
Yeah. One of the things, as a professional geologist, one of the things that I've found most enjoyable about geology is it's a real combination of right brain, left brain thinking. You need to have a scientific background to be able to understand what you're seeing. but you also have to have a very intuitive side to put it all together. And I found that a really satisfying job. At least for me, it is.
Yeah. There's some imagination because you're looking
absolutely.
You're looking at like footprints plus fingerprints of like sometimes large events, sometimes small events, sometimes events that take millions of years to take place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did a lot of work in the subsurface, and we used a lot of seismic. And with seismic, you can see in the subsurface. And I always used to think of it as like someone had dropped a plate and it shattered into about 100 different pieces. And then you cover it with about a 10-foot layer of dirt. And then you try and figure out what the plate looked like before it was dropped. I mean, that's a serious...
Yeah, by pounding on the surface of the dirt and listening to it.
By pounding on the top of the dirt and then taking it back.
Sounds
now
hard.
we get into some catastrophic mistakes that I've made.
Wait. Do you have access to GPR? So, because we really like to play around with that.
Yeah.
You mean ground penetrating radar?
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
You mean, did we when we did that work?
Well, I'm just curious. Like we've always been interested in.
We want one.
using
Can you get us
Yeah,
one?
basically, we want to look for caves.
I think the answer is no.
Okay,
Man, all right, we tried. We had to try.
We were talking during the break. We were talking about climate change, which I believe the climate changes all the time. I don't believe. I think there may be some anthropomorphic things involved, just a little bit. In general, the climate does what the climate's going to do.
Yeah.
What Mother Earth wants to do.
Yeah.
In geologic terms, we were going to talk about climate change. We're going to talk about catastrophic events. And you can talk about catastrophic events from a big point of view, like you were talking about.
Yeah,
Russ.
like long term.
Long-term things that happen. Or you can talk about catastrophic events that happen over a very short period of time geologically.
Yeah,
So
isochrones.
so if something happens, if you're looking at something that happened 5,000, 10,000 years ago, it happened over a 10-year period.
Yeah.
That's instantaneous as far as we can tell. in
Right,
geology.
right, yeah.
And the ones that have really interested me for the most part are the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Now, if you think about the Mediterranean, the Gibraltar, it has what's called a sill, or it's like, think of it, you step across in a door. The sill is about 700 feet deep. It wasn't always that deep. And you have to wonder, gosh, I don't remember the date now, but there's something called the Messinian salinity crisis. Mm-hmm. And in the Messinian salinity crisis, basically, the Mediterranean had been filled with water, and then the water supply was shut off. Water evaporated and basically turned to salt. All that was left behind was salt. That was the salinity crisis. When you had the water come back in again, you have to wonder, how did that come in? Did that come in a very short period of time? Did it come in over time, come through the Gibraltar? Or did it come in through another entrance, which maybe have been near where the Indian Ocean is, come in through some way through the Iran side? I don't know. The Black Sea is another area where we know we are finding villages 100, 150 feet deep in the water. Are you aware of that?
No.
There's villages that have been found with timber and everything, about 100, 150 feet deep in the water. And you have to wonder, when that Black Sea flooded, because it's a very shallow opening that lets water come in and out, and that's why it's called the Black Sea, is because it's kind of anaerobic in ways.
Okay.
And that's the reason that when you have timber at 150 feet, it
stays.
It's still there. It hasn't been oxidized. Wow. And so you have to wonder, was that part of the myth of the Great Flood?
Right.
The biblical flooding?
There's an idea that it happened quickly.
Yeah.
And flooded an area where people lived, yes.
And the kind of geometry with the Black Sea, you wipe out whole populations and if it flooded over a few years, you could wipe out whole populations with that kind of thing.
Right.
So I don't know. I look at, there's short-term events, and then there's the long-term catastrophic events that take place over a lot of time.
Like what about so the KT event? How long did they think that is there an idea of how? I mean, like obviously, if it was an impact, that's
an instantaneous event,
right? And then there's going to be repercussions from that event that lasts centuries, probably.
God.
Yeah,
probably thousands of years. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
But
Absolutely.
But the amount of energy input can move enormous amounts of material that leave geologic signs all over the place because you require similar energy input to move those materials later, right? I can't remember what the term for this is called, but it's something like when you're looking at a flood, you can see older, larger flood patterns because the material that bigger flood was able to move can't be moved by smaller floods, right? And so you can kind of see that it leaves footprints or fingerprints on the landscape. Mm-hmm. And so that, like, one of the things we talk about is how often, I'm sure you encountered this idea of uniformity when you were taking geology, I'm not sure if it's ever said explicitly, but the idea that we have to look at what we see in the geological evidence through the lens of forces that we know that act today. We can't make up stuff. And so the KT event being accepted kind of changed that. Right. Previous to that, you would have to that something that catastrophic would not have been considered because it doesn't follow the uniformity idea.
The normal rules, yeah.
Right.
No, the uniformity says basically what we see in the present is how we explain the past.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
And the law of superposition says if it's on top, that's younger.
That's younger.
Bottom line.
There you go. Yeah. Makes sense.
You're right. The KT event was a catastrophic event, both an instantaneous event and one that took place. The remnants of it, the repercussions of it, were felt over thousands of years afterwards.
Right.
And the ejecta, the material thrown, both just thrown and then dropped, and then was put in the atmosphere and carried around the Earth. It probably took 1,000 years or more just for that cloud of material, that cloud of dust, to totally die out. I mean, you had a true equivalent of a nuclear winter, I think, with that.
Right. It would have blocked sunlight, and and then it'd be raining mud and acid water,
and ash.
And ash. Yeah, they would set off volcanoes all over the place, right? I mean, you're talking about seismic. Some impact that enormous would send pressure waves through the planet, right? They would bounce around. You probably open faults, things would start moving. There'd be enormous earthquakes on scales that we can't imagine today.
The only thing that I think might even anywhere come near it, and it still would match it, but the only thing that might come near it would be if Yellowstone were to erupt.
Right, yeah.
That would be that kind of effect where Yellowstone, as far away as it is from us, we would still probably have inches, if not feet, of ash over us here.
Right.
It's orders of magnitude larger than St. Helens was. Orders of magnitudes larger.
Yeah.
So that if you understand that kind of concept, it's just, if it goes, and it will at some point, it's massive.
Yeah. And I mean, so there's, I'm sure that you can't have answers to all these questions, but like there are evidences of enormous lava flows from the past. Mm-hmm. Like the Canadian,
the basalts, the basalt.
Yeah,
flows.
There's just it's 40 meters thick and is hundreds of thousands of square miles.
Yes.
It's like what? What did that look like when it was happening?
Yeah.
How did anything survive that kind?
And you have to wonder, was that involved with the plate tectonics and the creation of part of the edges of the continent?
Yeah.
And it's all the kinds of activity that goes on with the Ring of Fire that we have around the Pacific now and everything.
Yeah.
That's they're massive basalt flows coming out of the north there, Colombia, in that area. Yeah.
So how about like the tectonic stuff, the drift, like that, that being accepted, was that a big, huge fight? That was
When I was going to school, academics build careers on the work that they've done, the models that they push, the papers they print and publish.
Yeah.
And I was going to school at about the time when geosynclinal theory was being replaced by plate tectonics. and there was this huge fight, and it's
So
really
explain the geosyncline.
well. You know that you have trenches, the Marianas Trench, Philippines Trench, all these other trenches, very, very deep. And there's you have to come up with a reason to explain why you have mountains next to trenches. So if you look at the Andes,
Yeah.
you look at the Andes, and then you look at the trenches right off in the Pacific. You have to explain why do you have this? The model that had been accepted was a geosyncline. It's just basically you had sags in the earth and certain kinds of rock called, among other things, called flysch and other kinds of rock fill this. Nobody up until the point that I started in school there had really thought much about how the plates, how South America and Africa fit together.
You're right.
If you look at the pattern with very little adjustment, you can make those things fit together. Excuse me. No worries. And at that time, they were finally starting to understand what was going on. And so what you have people talk to you about plate tectonic theory, just kind of described it generally to you?
Yeah, I mean we have a general knowledge, but
So,
go ahead and go through it.
Okay, in the center, like for example in the Atlantic, you have the central rifts in the Atlantic, mid-Atlantic rifts. You're creating oceanic crust there. As that crust comes up and it's created, and it boils up and it pushes on both sides. So you're pushing Europe away on one side, and you're pushing North America away on the other side. If you're creating crust, you also have to be consuming crust at the same rate, or the Earth is just going to get bigger. And that ain't happening. So we know, so we know that oceanic crust is heavier. It's basaltic. It's heavier than continental crust, which is more granitic. So, for example, all along North America and South America, Central America, the Pacific plate is being pushed under.
There's a subduction zone.
Yeah, it's a subduction zone.
Okay, yeah.
And so you're consuming plate there, and that's why you also have the volcanoes above them, because you're dumping off heat and other sorts of things there.
And there's weird stuff happening because it's water saturated and it's being shoved down into the
And so you have explosive kinds of things going on.
Right.
But that's how you explain you have a 5 mile trench next to a mountain that's 15,000 feet high.
Okay.
And that's one. And then now I'm doing a shift into climate change. When you look at that area, the only way that the people that believe in climate change, the only evidence they really have, that we who have problems with climate change being man-made, one of the things that we can explain pretty much everything, but they have their models. And their models have a lot of issues, but they won't tell you about the issues. Now, I can't speak about the current models, but I know the older models, when they were modeling the climate change and the change in temperature and stuff. When you make a model, you have to make a cell for that model to work on. So you make a network. You make think of it like a fishing net is draped over the earth. A very, very fine one. Yeah. And those are the cells. Okay. Now your computer has to work on those cells. It manipulates each cell. But because the Earth is so big and computers are so limited, at least in many ways, the cells are pretty large. So, for example, I know for a fact that some of the early cells in these computer models had the top of the Andes Mountains and sea level in one cell.
In the same cell.
In one cell.
Yeah.
How do you model that?
Right. It's clearly not the same.
You don't
climate.
model it well.
That's going to be incredibly complex.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about the computer models are my evidence, I provide a computer model as evidence for something. First of all, a computer model is not data. It's not evidence. What it is, it can be manipulated.
It's an extrapolation of some kind of yeah.
Based on the input.
Yeah.
I have done a lot of modeling myself, and I am here to tell you, you can make a computer model sit up and bark like a dog. You have multiple parameters that are changed. So, for you to trying to understand what's going on, and we still don't understand climate.
Yeah.
We don't understand all the variables that go into that. But as best we can, I think, excuse me, they will model these things. But they won't tell you, for example, that they will put multipliers in, a multiplier of 1.5 or of 2.5. So when you have the results, it says we're going to see climate grow over 100 years temperature is going to increase over the next 100 years to this or this or this. Almost always, at least in the models that I've seen, the growth in temperature, that increase in temperature, almost always matches up to the multiplier. So they've already got, that's a predetermined kind of thing that they've put in.
A constant.
It's a multiplier. They've cut back drastically. They cut the number of stations they get temperatures. They've cut back dramatically. They were always many times they were taking readings off of heat sinks or that sort of thing where you're not getting the right temperature. The proxies were manipulated. We've talked about proxies before, and how man manipulated the proxies when he did the hockey stick. I'm sure you've talked about that, right?
Yeah, the hockey stick graph we've mentioned before. But yeah, the proxies of it were manipulated. Yeah,
yeah. He
wouldn't divulge his.
No.
Yeah,
and even NASA and NOAA will not give out their data, or they haven't been. And if you go back and look at a lot of the data when they do give it out, you can see that the data has been manipulated. So they will say, "Here's the original data, but here's the data we do our modeling on," and they're not the same. And one of the things that they say, one of the reasons is that they say that they have to manipulate that data is because you have different equipment gathering data points 50, 70 years ago versus what we have now. So they manipulate, they think, but I think data is data. And either you believe that data point or you don't. And I wouldn't manipulate it,
Yeah.
And if you don't manipulate it, you don't get the kinds of fits, the kinds of numbers and predictions that they claim to have.
That's really interesting.
So as a geologist, I know climate has changed over time. There's been at least five major glacial events lasting tens, if not hundreds of millions of years. And when you go,
these are really old. Are you talking about?
Oh yeah, this is back like 3 billion years ago.
Okay,
starting.
yeah.
I mean that
Ice
kind of age.
Stuff. Yeah,
there's been at least 5 that we know of.
Right.
And
it's sort of a long time ago. Geologically speaking.
It's not instantaneous. It's not catastrophic. But we know those events are there, and by definition, when you go out of a glacial event into a glacial interstitial or an interstage, you're going out of a glacial event. Now, some of those are smaller. In other words, you'll have this big glacial event, and you'll see drops or increases in temperature in that. But they're very short-lived, very small. But when you have a fairly long period between your glacial events, that's your interstage, your interstitials. And by definition, that's a period of global warming.
Yeah.
There you go.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have it. And that's what we're in now. The ice, probably 11.5 to 11.5 to 12,000 years ago, ice, we started to see the melting.
Yep.
And we have had 2 minor changes. We've had the
little ice age.
Yep. And then we've had the warming period. And both of those were just typical of the kind of
oscillations
that you expect to see. But we're in a global warming period now. And I think,
and it's like one of the longest ones we've had in the past 2 million years.
So we are predicting to going back in. And interestingly enough, both the Russian and the Japanese Academy of Sciences in the last couple of years independently looked at the data, and they weren't looking at modeling; they were looking at the data, and they were trying the data back to some of them Lincoln cycles and these sorts of things.
Yes.
And they're predicting, both of those wound up predicting that we're going to be cooling. We're going back into a colder period.
So yeah, I was going to bring that up, that we've looked at some of these graphs of temperature changes over long periods of time, sea level rise and fall. And if you look back, 20, 50,000 years, even up to 150,000 years, you see this sort of spike, and it falls, and it spikes, and it falls. And there are a couple of places, like at the onset of the Younger Dryas or the end of the Younger Dryas, where
there's a disruption in the pattern.
The spikes are going higher and lower, and there's a few. If you go back, tens and tens of thousands of years, you see a few higher spikes that are not at more like the Younger Dryas, and then you get to the Holocene, where we're at, and you see, like, for example, the sea level rise. Mm-hmm. That curve is going up, and we're right at that point where we're a little bit above what seems to be more of the average, but these spikes that go a little bit higher, we're like, that's not very much higher before it starts going back down.
Yeah. Have we reached the crest?
Have we reached the crest or not?
We don't know.
Yeah,
I would say, I think, given what I have seen and given what I've read, my gut says, I think we are going to start seeing cooler. I don't know how much, and I don't know, probably smaller increments of being cooler. On an average, the average is getting cooler, but that's just my opinion.
What's also interesting is that we're in a deep solar minimum at this moment.
Yes.
And when you look at the Little Ice Age, it was called the Maunder minimum.
Yep.
So another deep solar minimum.
Yeah.
If you believe that, and I do, I think you can tie climate back to
solar activity
and solar radiation.
I mean, it's inarguable that the reason the Earth is warm is because of the sun, right? If you remove, I've tried to make this argument before. If you just take the sun out of the equation, you have an ice ball where even the gases of the atmosphere are frozen.
Yeah.
There's zero climate without the sun. It doesn't matter how much CO2 gas you have frozen on the surface. It's not going to change the temperature of that ball of ice.
It drives the whole system.
Right. So, but you put the sun in, and now you have this. The sun is the primary driver, I guess is how I would put it, right, of climate. And so there are strange and interesting
secondary effects,
chaotic effects that happen on the Earth because of its envelope of atmosphere and then the biosphere and the water. But it's the sun.
And if you go back and you look at the sun, there are cycles in the sun.
Right.
And you then start looking to see if those cycles tie back to our climate.
And also the
they do remarkably
cycles.
Well.
Right.
And also even other planets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you brought up the Milankovitch cycles as well, which is just bringing us closer or further away from the sun for different periods of time.
It's the changing of the obliquity of the orbit of Earth and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, what he said.
Yeah. It's sort of a pulsing.
Thanks, gents.
Give it up, Johnson.
I know what I'm talking about, guys. I'm a professional over here.
So this I love this topic, and I also love the aspects of the ancient myths or legends that we've received over time. And so we during the break we were talking about Noah's flood and how that might play in to these cycles. And what is your opinion on that, or have you really looked into that?
How, when you say cycles, what do you...
These cycles, basically climate changes over time and the flood myths that...
I think the flood, how many civilizations, probably be quicker to try and delineate which civilizations do not have a flood myth.
There you go. Yeah. And then, of course, the ones we were talking about that are 200 feet underground or underwater.
Yeah.
It's just looking at the Watcher's graph here in the Gibraltar, the seal. That's the kind of thing we're talking about.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There's the sill.
That's the sill. And that is the kind of thing, if that that's how it is now, it may not have been like that all the time. And what's it? He's showing it at
So we have a depth here in meters.
Oh, meters, okay.
And the peak of the sill is at roughly about 400. And then at the base here, it's at 1,400.
showing the Atlantic Ocean currents moving into the Mediterranean.
Right. So you can imagine that when the sea level was much lower, if that thing was sticking above the water, it would have blocked water from coming in.
Was higher.
But then as
Look at the salinity of the water, too.
As the ocean level rises, it starts to pour through, and then it erodes that thing down as it's pouring across. And so now
But not only that, what this graph is showing here is that once the ocean level rises far enough, the Mediterranean seawater then begins to wash back into the ocean,
raising the
salinity of the ocean.
Well, the Mediterranean water, when we talked about that, the Messinian salinity crisis.
Yeah.
It's a denser water. It's a heavier water.
So it falls to the bottom.
And so what happens? Well, there's two things going on. The Atlantic bounces on top of it. When the Atlantic water goes into the Mediterranean, it bounces on top of the denser Mediterranean water.
Yeah.
And you get tongues of that dense Mediterranean water reaching out into the Atlantic, and it drops. It always stays low.
Drops down low.
Because
So that's what
it's
that
denser.
is.
Yeah.
Okay, 1,000 feet below sea level.
Wow.
Little known fact. Just a little known fact. You have this same kind of thing going on where you have the Gulf of Mexico go up into the Mississippi River. So you have tongues of denser, more salty water coming out of the Gulf of Mexico going up the Mississippi River, which is why you will find saltwater sharks
in the
up the Mississippi.
Wow.
I had wondered about that.
And I should have said that's meters, not feet. 1,000 meters.
It's 1,000 meters, yeah.
That's really interesting.
But yeah, you're right. There are flood myths and stories and tales from almost every culture we can find all over the world. American Indians have tons and tons of the stories like this too, and they talk about how some of their ancestors escaped it, or and there's so many similar elements. That's what's interesting to us, because we look a lot at these myths and mythology, and we were wondering, we're asking the same question, like how much of this story is telling us something that really happened. It's just been carried down through generation after generation. And you look all over the world, and there's these flood stories, but they seem to have common elements that don't make sense in terms of there was just a flood. Because for one, they're similar to the Noah story that a lot of people are familiar with from the Bible. There's an element of pre-warning. Somebody was warned beforehand in order to construct something or to prepare. And we see that in so many flood myths that they're told, like build a canoe, or climb this mountain, or find the tallest tree. Some element of
or go underground.
Go underground, yeah. Get out of the way of it. There's this element of in other words, somebody shows up and says, "Hey, this is about to happen." That's a really interesting part of the story. Now, obviously, in the biblical accounts, this is attributed to God, but it's not always attributed to God across the myth.
Do you think that the biblical account of the flood is taken from Babylonian or pre-Babylonian myths?
Yeah, the Epic of Gilgamesh has it in there, yeah.
So it's a rereading, or it's a retranslation of that,
right,
or a rendering of that. As a scientist, I can look at the Black Sea, and I can say, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
I could possibly see an event happening there in a way with that geometry and a quick flooding. If there's a sill that goes from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea, and that sill gets breached quickly, all of a sudden, I could see a flood of water coming in, and that being, to them, that's their world. That's that flood for them.
Right.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't know how, though, you propagate that to
the entire planet,
the rest of the world. I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me. I absolutely agree with you. Civilizations across the world have the flood myth. If you don't have a flood, I don't know how you do that.
Yeah.
A worldwide flood. I don't know how you do it.
Right. So one of the ways that we've talked about quite often, and as you know, we look into the end of the Younger Dryas event, where modern geology is saying, okay, if sea levels rose 400 feet, that most civilizations on the coasts of something, right? A 400-foot sea level rise will, in some cases, cover hundreds and hundreds of miles inland, right?
Wipe them out.
Right. So that can be the source of it. Now, in that story, the flood never recedes like it does in a lot of these other stories. Eventually, it goes back down, They find land, I guess, is maybe clearer, but there's this implication that the waters recede, but really, when you go through the stories, they find some other place to land.
Yeah.
But that is a global event.
Yes, it is.
Sea level rise all over the world goes up 400 feet. Now, in some places, it happens faster because this water is dumping off the North American continent and off of Europe and everything, and it's pouring into the Atlantic and the Pacific. How quickly that rise took place is not really clear, and it's made complex by isostatic changes like we've talked about. But in some places, the isostatic changes may have made it happen a lot faster. If land is sinking while water is coming up,
Land tends to sink fairly slowly.
Right.
I mean, not.
But there's an elasticity that's happening here, right?
Yes.
Right. So at the beginning, if the ice melts catastrophically, let's just go with this idea of a fragmented comet comes in and it actually melts a lot of ice very fast, and that starts a process of more ice melting very quickly, and that's just dumping in, and this is happening over a matter of say months or weeks. Okay. All that weight is being removed off of the continental plate.
Yes.
Well, I think this is a good point.
And added onto the ocean basins.
Yes. But we're still seeing, when you talk about that isostatic rebound, we are still seeing rebound in the Michigan Basin.
Yeah.
So up north, where in Chicago and everything, where you had that 2 miles of ice, that depressed the earth.
Yeah.
Big time.
Right.
That ice is gone, but we are
it's
still seeing rebound
still popping
from
up,
that. It's
right.
still coming up now from that.
Right. And so we can see, like,
amazing.
Yeah, we can see it's happening very slowly, but you can imagine
An accelerated rate.
that it was accelerated when it was first beginning.
Might have.
Because it's like all that weight is removed very quickly, and it's gonna.
But another aspect of what your question or your idea about the you have the flood and then you have sort of the waters receding could be accelerated rebound.
That's right. You're right. Stuff is rising up out of the water that's being.
That's what would get rid of the water. Is this?
There you
This
go.
rebound.
Yeah.
I'd have to think about everything that I've seen. The rebound was slow. That doesn't mean that it wasn't fast at some time. It's just like I say, the rebound that I've seen is the rebound on the edges of the Red Sea. So the Red Sea splits. You get some lift, and that rebound may be thermal.
Yeah.
Because it's such a hot spot under there, it's lifting it up.
Right.
You have like I say, in the northern part of the U.S., of North America, you have the Michigan Basin, which is still recovering from the ice that it had, that ice sheet that it had. I'm sure there's other areas. Those are the only two that I can think of. I'm sure there's tons of other areas.
Well, one idea that we've looked at is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, like you were talking about. Mm-hmm. The crust it's denser, but it's thin there, relatively speaking. Mm-hmm. And then there's this ridge. So there's a hinge point. Okay, so we're thinking of like Azores. Okay, you got islands. You lower the seas 400 feet. You put a whole bunch of ice up north, and then you may have an isostatic response it's a forebulge, right? The glacial, it's like pushing it upwards.
Yes, ahead of itself. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So now you like remove all the ice and dump it into the basins. That land is going to sink back down while the water is rising.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
What is the viscosity of granite?
I don't know.
That is a retard question.
It's a common question.
I'm just saying, we're trying to figure out
Viscosity of granite.
how fast can solid rock flow.
So, okay, that's interesting. We've beat that to death pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I find it really quite interesting that you guys have this kind of discussion here.
every week.
Every week. I will start listening. I'm, in all honesty, I haven't thought about these kinds of things for a while, and it really, it feels good going back and talking.
All right,
it
man.
Really
It's
does.
been
awesome.
great to have you, and
does.
we'll put you down on the list as subject matter expert from now on. Like, hold on, we got to call up Johnson.
We got to call up Johnson.
and ask him a geology question.
and not a smart ass Johnson, the other Johnson.
Yeah. The precision kind of Johnson, the scientist.
Yes. So thank you so much for coming out. And,
I really appreciate it.
Look at this. We're at 2 hours and 18 minutes already.
Wow, time's gone. It really
Yeah,
has.
fastest 2 hours in podcasting.
This has been very enjoyable, guys. I really appreciate you inviting me, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
So,
Bob,
take care.
Sean, thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right, folks, you know what to do.
That's right. Good night, Adamu.
We love you.
Get back to work.